My name is David Siddons, and I'm president of the David Siddons Group.
My name is Ana Bozovic, and I'm the founder of Analytics Miami.
And this is our section for the 2022 Miami Real Estate Forecast. So strap in, boot in, download, and get ready for the 21st century. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
First of all, thank you so much for the introduction. So we've known each other for many years, and what's been very fascinating is that we've had these conversations documenting this whole unrolling of the new world. So thank you for having me again. My name is Ana. I'm the founder of Analytics Miami, which is where I publish long-term trend analysis on the South Florida real estate markets. In these reports, as you know, I really tried to cut the noise and bring clarity, find the outlier driving forces to what's happening in the market. I'm a governor of the Association of Realtors. We're the biggest association in the country. I'm very proud to serve on that. And I basically try to sort of see how the wind is blowing and make sense of everything that's happening here in our world.
Yeah, because we both, I mean, we don't use the term economists or analysts because it's kind of like, it doesn't really encompass what we do. So we're kind of students of human behavior, but we're selling real estate every day and we're talking to people all day long. And this is part for my 2022 forecast, which is relaying and understanding where is the Miami real estate market going and the South Florida market going for 2022. So strap in and get ready.
This is exciting.
18 months ago, let's jump into 18 months ago, we sat with each other and you said, look, no filter necessary here. I'm just going to, take the gloves off and tell you exactly what's going on in the market. And we sat in August. I'm just reflecting back very, very quickly for the audience. Go back and watch the video from last August in 2020. We were just getting our grip on COVID, understanding what on earth this thing was. And we're still dealing with it. And as we reflect back, we saw us coming through a market that we were figuring out what was going on. We were a little bit cautious about the condo market. We were telling people, be aware, don't go crazy, pay 2012 prices. And, but it's a great place to be. Everybody wants to come here, great weather. And then like a smack to the stomach, we just went into it and the market exploded.
It did. The world sort of it was pushed into what I'm calling the 21st century world. This is the very important thing to recognize. When we last spoke, that was the early days of the emergence out of COVID. The dust hadn't really begun to settle. People were just starting to emerge. And we weren't really sure, we're feeling it, but we weren't really sure how it was all going to shape up. 18 months has passed, and now we're seeing. And the point that I really want to emphasize, so whenever I look at markets, I think it's very important to identify the fundamental underlying drivers, the things that are pushing, the forces that are creating the momentum that's causing all the effects that we see around us. Because all the little behaviors we talk about, they're manifested by this underlying momentum and the forces pushing it. And so the most important baseline thing to recognize is that what we have previously referred to as normal was the 20th century world. It was not normal in the 19th century, it was normal in the 20th century. And I'm saying this because it's a human condition that most people think that the present will always continue and that the future will resemble the present. And it's not a bad way to think necessarily, because usually it does, except if you're in that period of rapid change. And that rapid change happens every 100 years or so. The analogy I tell people is, look how different the world was in 1900 versus 2000. Why would the next century be any less dramatic? And really what we've been living in is the post-World War II, 20th century world, with New York City as the capital of the world, because post-World War II, America became the reserve currency. Europe was essentially destroyed, Russia was communist, China was communist. We received the brain drain of the world, and New York was one of the epicenters. And that's the world we're living in. Our offices, our schools, our habits, the way we lived, all that infrastructure was built before the internet in the 20th century. There is no logic dictating that it will continue that way in perpetuity. And so now we're in that period of change. COVID broke habits long enough to allow the formation of new ones for those who can, and those new habits are shaping largely around the capabilities of the internet, and people who can are moving. And at the same time, we have what I'm calling our feeder jurisdictions like New York and California that are undergoing tremendous negative momentum cycles. They're pushing money and people out hand over fist at the same time that new habits are forming.
That's key, because the migration of people into Miami, and this is this is not a surprise to say, oh, we're the recipients of huge amounts of migration from New York and from California, San Francisco, LA, and all these different areas. What's really been a question that everyone then turns to is the sustainability of our market. Can we sustain this? Or is this a bubble and it pops and it goes backwards? But the truth of the matter is, what you're saying is New York was the epicenter. the world has shifted now. New York will still be New York, but the ability for us to go backwards means a correction, and the change is a move forward, and it won't be a move back. It's fundamentally a shift.
History never goes backwards, ever. So we're in the new frontier. Again, all these habits, how we went to work, these were pre-internet habits, and now they've been broken.
Yeah.
And now the world is shifting. At the same time, we have, taxation was always there, but now we have also perceptions of freedom, crime concerns. All these things are also fueling the fire that's bringing people here.
So sustainability of a market, and again, this is the question, the obvious questions that everyone's going to ask, and this is like if you go into Google and it's kind of clickbait answers, you're going to get, is the Miami real estate market in a bubble? Is it going to pop? I mean, again, this is dramatic news, and this is obviously what drives news, which is selling newspapers and articles, and that's what people are going to naturally gravitate towards. But a bubble would be a misunderstanding, and again, why do people ask that question?
Oh, last time it was.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Historically, you look at Miami's market, and if you don't know Miami and you're reflecting on this and you're kind of going in, and again, we have a lot of data on our website. We go back for 15 years. So you see these trends and patterns emerging, but it's important to understand that you can't just extrapolate or kind of measure the economic cycle and think, okay, well, we're really, really high, we're at a new peak. That must mean a drop must follow. Drops will eventually always follow because cycles are cycles. But the question of just because we're at a peak doesn't mean we can't go higher or sustain this level.
Well, and the biggest difference from the previous cycle is the use of debt. Bubbles are almost always created by debt. Debt sort of drives asset prices higher. And then when you see a precipitous drop in asset prices, it's usually because the underlying asset loses value and they can no longer sustain the debt and it crashes. This is not a debt-driven market. Actually, I just put together numbers. Last year, Tri-County, South Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties, million plus, were 62% all cash purchases.
Yeah, and that's just the million plus. When you get into the luxury markets and when you're dealing with a 3 million plus. I don't remember the last time I had a client who needed to buy with a mortgage. I mean, they do close with mortgages because, again, it's easy, it's very low interest rates, but they don't actually need to. They've got enough liquidity to close all cash, and their offers are all cash offers.
So this is the opposite of what drove the last cycle of price appreciation. This is not a debt-driven cycle at all. Opposite.
So, I mean, and that I think that's hopefully clear. If you're watching this, you're going to really understand that it is not going to happen the same way that it happened before. You're not going to get this.
No, there's no like loose lending,
collapses.
Tons of debt, none of that. The lending is not loose and it's heavily cash. So those conditions are not in play. And also there's this fundamental shift. I call it like it's like the grand pandemic migration. People are shifting. Actually, the census just released a report. It was census patterns from July 2020 to July 2021. And Florida and Texas were the largest recipients of migration. I think we gained over 300,000 people.
Wow.
At the same time, the biggest losers were New York and California and Illinois.
And so when you've got this amount of people coming into Miami, and obviously prices gone up, you see 27% increases in general terms, but in specific areas, in very high level, sub-markets, luxury sub-markets, you've seen 50, 60% increase in prices, which seems absolutely staggering. And people go, how can that continue? How can that keep going? Well, obviously trees don't grow to the sky. We established that clearly. But for it to hold at this level, what do we say to the buyers out there who are coming in, who are looking at what they're calling record prices? Are they going to have to continue to pay these? Can they still go higher? What's your opinion?
So when I look at looking in a market, again, you always want to try to look at the fundamental basic principles, and we always fall back to supply and demand. So we have supply, active listings, million plus, actually across the market, across all prices, has almost halved. It's dropped in half since pre-pandemic. At the same time, transaction volume in dollars spent has skyrocketed. Million plus year to date, South Florida, there's dollars spent more than tripled. At the same time, inventory has dropped something like 45% for million plus. So supply and demand. And it's heavily cash, as we mentioned before. So given that inventory is dropping, there's a heavy use in cash, and there's an uptick in dollars spent. Where would the downward pressure come from? I don't see it. The real friction is not enough inventory. That could be a decrease in velocity of sales, but the pricing of an underlying asset, I don't see where the downward pressure would come from. Now, will it keep going up? Of course not. Trees don't grow to the sky, right? I think this is, I still see them trending up a little bit because of that extreme pressure in inventory and the surge of the usage of so much cash being used. But I think really it's resetting to what we're going to call a new normal here, because we're getting domestic buyers coming from markets where they're used to higher prices.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's why when you look at statistics, it's very important to know the right indexes that you're looking at, because if for 2022 you start paying attention to things like the volume of sales, that is a really bad indicator of the success of the market, because we simply don't have the products. You can't sell what you don't have. That doesn't mean products that desire, the appetite for real estate has slowed. It just means the ability to purchase has slowed by virtue of supply. And when demand stays low, the demand stays high and supply stays low, there's no option. There's no, like I said, the laws of economics, gravity are not negotiable.
No. Then the other question is, what is the continued appetite for migration to South Florida? Will people keep wanting to come here? That's market demand. That's what's driving it. And I think 1,000%. Things move in cycles. We have positive momentum here. Our feeder jurisdictions, as I keep saying, have negative momentum. We've always had a tax break. That's always been the case, right? That's not what's changed. What's changed now is that, as I was mentioning, a percentage of people are adopting hybrid work models around the internet because their habits were broken. And at the same time, where they're living is becoming, in some people's minds, more hostile to freedom. There have been crime upticks. They're not happy with how their kids are being taught at schools, all these things. And that's not everyone, of course, but a significant enough percentage are affected by this or feel affected by this that they're moving. And we're on the receiving end, as is Texas, for example.
Yeah.
And I don't see those drivers changing. Like, the feeder jurisdictions aren't all of a sudden going to about face and change all those conditions.
Absolutely. There's no reason why they'll reverse. Obviously, you've got limitations of spaces in schools for kids. You've got, because the types of people moving down, it's important to understand who we're dealing with. We've obviously got we're sitting right now in my home, we're shooting this video from my house. In the neighborhood of Ponce Davis, and I'm surrounded at all times and always with lots and lots of families with kids, and they're going to the local schools, and every day the phone will go and it's a New York family or a San Francisco family or an LA family, and they're like, well, I want to move down here for 2022, but I got to find a place for my son or daughter at school, and I got to find a house, and both are in short supply. And then obviously we've got the other side, you've got the condo buyers, you've got the people in Brickell, you've got many different demographics in Miami, and there's a big variety of people moving down into South Florida and Miami.
Tech guys are moving now.
Tech guys, so
crypto.
Talking about like the engine of Miami, the city of what it was, and maybe coming back to your original point of it's a new world, it's a new world order.
Completely. Yep.
How do you see, you talk to a lot of different individuals. I mean, you talk to a lot of business people, a lot of investment groups, a lot of hedge fund guys, and from your perspective, you're seeing a business shift. Like, legitimately, it's not just flight capital or money, people who made money in New York who now just want to spend it here.
They're moving their families here.
Yeah.
As you're seeing, people are relocating their offices, their businesses, their families, and it becomes sort of a cascading effect.
Yeah.
You get a few guys come down here, their wives like it, their kids like it, the other ones come and visit. They said, wow, it's nice here. I get this now. I've known with someone I know for years. I've been telling him that Miami's happening, Miami's happening. He's Israeli, and we're sitting in Brickell a few weeks ago, and he's looking around, and he says, Ana, I think you're right. He goes, I'm seeing regular people walking around in the street, going to their jobs. And he says,
and you say regular people. It's interesting because Brickell, typically, we would often talk about the condo market in Miami. We talked about this with Sunny Hours. I've got to reflect on Sunny Hours that you said, like, they were building buildings for who are they building them for? Exactly who is going to live in those? It was a poster child of excess. And now, we've always wanted to push Miami forward as a New York-esque environment, a real engine where there's real business and it's really happening. And it was always kind of dismissed as like, yeah, you're trying to be that, but you're really not. It's still a touristy city where people come to hang out, get some sun, but then they're going to leave again.
It was, look, things change quickly. People forget Detroit had the highest per capita income in the United States in 1960.
Yeah.
No longer.
No.
Things change quickly. And look, it's not to be dramatic. It's not like the death of New York. I grew up in New York City, so if anything, my bias is to like it. I liked it so much I stayed for college. Like, I love New York. And I'm not saying it's going to die. It doesn't mean that. It's a shift in focus.
It'll reinvent itself, as it always does.
It's like before New York, London was perceived as the capital of the world. Before London, it was Amsterdam. Those cities didn't blow up.
Well, we look at
there.
the empire growth. I mean, I'm a big lover of Ray Dalio. You've read his book too, and The Changing World Order. You see now that we talked about, you know, the Dutch Empire, and then you looked at the British Empire, and then you obviously, you know, look at the US Empire, and now obviously the emergence of China. London's still London. It hasn't disappeared.
They're all still there. New York will still be there.
Yep.
Is it going to be that epicenter it was during the 20th century? No. Why would it? We're in a new century. Things change.
Yeah.
It was that before the internet. And now the internet's come, and you have different conditions in place in New York that are perceived as hostile to capital, perhaps, and to personal safety on the street. And people are leaving. Some people.
So that brings a shift, and I'm going to bring that into, I guess, the real estate subject, so to speak, is the condo market. Because the housing market is kind of easy to say, okay, it's very, very strong, and you know why it's strong, and you can see the migration, you can see the families. The condo market, our condo market, has typically been very cyclical and driven by South American money and flight capital and all these kind of very fragile systems that ultimately break. Now we're seeing a shift, and if we're seeing a shift towards New York, where we're still, and we were talking about the numbers, we're still cheap or cheaper.
The prices are not outlandish.
Yeah.
If you're coming from New York City, you don't have sticker shock necessarily.
Yeah. And the emergence of new condos, because we've been through 2 cycles. We've done this long enough now that we've been through 08, and we saw and predicted the corrections in 2015, where again there was just more supply than demand and prices dropped. Now we're seeing, you know, rents have increased, but the new production of condo, new luxury condo that we've got in Miami, and we've got a number of buildings across the urban core. We've got, you know, buildings like Baccarat and the Aston Martin building and the Waldorf Astoria and the new St. Regis, which is coming to the south side of Brickell, and a lot of buildings at dollar per square foot, well in excess of $1,000 a square foot, when typically you'd have product in the 500 a square foot range. And now it's like, how do you double? How do you suddenly double the numbers? Do we have a real legitimate appetite for that? And on the surface, you might go, well, how can all these renters afford that? But you said something kind of interesting earlier on, which was a change.
If we believe the thesis of what's happening, that the world is shifting and that Miami is emerging as a capital, and one of the capitals of this new 20th century reality, then my answer is yes, because what's happening has just begun.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to slow down.
So you've got people who will now see the urban core as a legitimate primary choice of a place to live. Brickell, downtown Edgewater, and these areas, when you look at it statistically, is very heavily driven by a rental-based market.
I believe so. Look, we have all the places, we have all the kind of ingredients in place. We have one of the best airports in the country, just 15 minutes away from downtown. Like that's wonderful. I think Miami International has the most direct international flights than any airport
and it's huge
in America.
I mean, it's grown so much.
And it's growing, and it's right there. It's not like JFK where you have to suffer and add an hour and a half to your trip just to get to, I mean, I have like PTSD from a lifetime of JFK. Every time I get in an Uber and go to the airport here, I'm like, that's it.
It's so
wonderful.
Quick.
It's so
in
quick.
And out.
It's so quick.
Wonderful.
So we have that. We have, you know, obviously the quality of life is definitely a factor. People come here to experience it. They want it's healthier. They want to be here. And now there's enough. There's enough momentum. Enough businesses have moved here, and senior people have moved here. That the momentum has built.
Everything's all great sunshine and roses, and sometimes there's got to be some winners and some losers, or there's going to be some better deals. Finding the better deals. And you said, look, you've got your podcast and you're searching out and you're in a process like I'm doing every day. Clients will say, find me the deal. How do we find the deals going into 2022?
You know what? Residential real estate is still not so, I don't want to say efficiently priced, but yeah, efficiently, because you have people pricing all over the place, right? So
it feels like literally I was sitting
with... It's a funny thing.
It is the weirdest thing when I sat at lunch and I was having this conversation. I was hearing the story of top brokers all talking to each other. Someone comes past the table and said, so I'm wondering what this is worth. And one of the agents said, I don't know what anything is worth anymore, because it just changes, it keeps changing. And it's very hard to pin it down, and it's very hard to understand, and it's why people talk about bubbles. When you say, well, some guy just bought this for $10 million and he just flipped it for 15, and this was bought for 15 and he just flipped it for 25. Like, how does that become economically sensible? How do you balance that? How do you understand that? How do you justify to a buyer who's coming in and saying, okay, this is the highest dollar per square foot that's ever been paid for a product?
I would say, like, what's the alternative? You have to look at the whole landscape, and your client has to trust in you that you're honestly conveying the whole landscape. And if you can show that there is no alternative at a lower price, then that is the market.
Well, it's the most expensive thing until it's not.
Correct.
And we've seen that this last year, where in a deal people come and go, wow, that's, you know, I know that in 2019, and we reflect on this in previous reports, 2019, where we're sitting right now, the top of the market was at $785 a square foot, and then the following year it went $935 a square foot. And then someone would say, well, that was $935, why am I going to pay $1,000 or $1,100? And now we've got it at $1,300 a square foot. So supply and demand will always govern things, and as long as there's a demand and an appetite for product and a need for product, it's going to drive the numbers either to be stable or to keep going up. The only thing that slows us down is we don't have the product. So coming back to how do we find the deals? Well, you know, we talk about this. Our conversations are more atypical now than ever. Top agents are becoming bigger because we are talking to each other, sharing product. We're going off market. I mean, I have someone in my team, all they do is make phone calls to buyers off market to see if they want to sell, because there's absolutely no other choice.
Correct, especially single family home market, anywhere close to the urban core is just...
Yeah. And the appetite for condos has been incredible. Luxury, ultra-luxury condos.
And I think that condos, so the single family home market was the first spike during the pandemic because people had this desire for outdoor space,
Well, we saw that coming. We talked about that in the last video, but not so much the condos.
And then the condos came a little bit after, because not everyone wants to live in a house, and people are going to readjust to living in post-COVID, you know, during COVID in a condo, and we're getting that wave coming now also. And the condo market was an extreme, the expensive portions of it were an extreme oversupply before this.
Yeah.
And so now that inventory is being absorbed, it's dropped around 30% or so. But when I talk about deals, like, you know, even in the urban core, for not like brand new super luxury, but stuff that's been around for 10 years or so, nice buildings in the urban core, you can still get stuff within the previous highs. Yeah. Because it was such oversupply before. So I would define all those as deals, because they're not going to keep going down. They're going to go up from there.
Yeah, and just, you know, new isn't necessarily sometimes better. It's just new.
No, it's just new.
And I think that there is some good product that exists out in the market. And it's same goes with houses. I mean, you don't have to buy a brand new house and you pay a premium for it. And of course, people want it. I mean, I'm seeing my house right now, it's brand new. But getting hold of that now is increasingly hard unless you build. And again, long-term views, there's going to be a continued appetite for that. It's very much a limited supply. We kind of know what's coming down the pipeline 1, 2, 3 years from now. And I know because I see the construction sites, there's not a lot.
No, there really isn't.
Not a lot at all.
There really isn't.
So it's going to be, I mean, we can't view more than 12 months ahead. But for this year, things are looking up.
It's a really interesting time, and that's the part that I just really want to keep emphasizing, is that the future will not and does not need to resemble the past. People need to get their minds switched on that and understand the reality that what we have perceived as normal, we have defined as normal so far, has been a 20th century reality. And just get that notion out of your minds. There's a new century coming. Listen, our cell phones were magic 40 years ago. They didn't exist. Right? We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's happening. Well, rather, actually, there's change happening. There's a shift happening. So just release that anchor to the past. It doesn't serve anyone in their thinking. And accept that the world always changes, and that as different as the world was 100 years from now, it will be that much more different, maybe even accelerated now because of technology 100 years from now. And you have to sort of see where the cycles are going and where the momentum is going, right? We have positive momentum places like this and other negative momentum places. And you want to align yourself, your families, and your money with where the positive flow is going. Because humanity does improve. It goes, there's that hockey stick up. You just want to avoid the calamities, right? Well, I always tell people, it's like the 20th century gave us the car, the airplane. It gave us the, you know, the cell phone at the end, you know, electricity, all that stuff, right? So you want to make sure that you're aligned with where the progress is headed. And the progress always flows someplace else. That's just the nature of history. And here in South Florida, we're one of the places, due to a whole myriad of reasons, we're one of the places where the money and the people are flowing to. And it's just begun.
And that sums it up perfectly. That sums it up perfectly. We kind of come full circle. It started as that, it's finished at that. Anna, it's always incredible to have these chats with you. I always learn so much. It's great. I feel like I can keep on for hours.
Likewise. No, this is an exciting time we're all living through, everyone. This is a great time in history, and how cool that we've been sort of having these conversations throughout it. We're going to keep documenting it as it goes. This is fantastic.
This will keep going. There are more of these to come. Yeah, I want to thank the audience for watching, and I always want to remind everyone, you know, click below, subscribe. Go to my website, see my information below. You can see the entire report for 2022. There's many sections. And again, Anna has her own entire ecosystem of information.
Yeah, please find me over at Analytics Miami. You'll be able to get all my reports, links to other things that I put out. So find me there and it'll connect to everything.
And as I always say, if you want to be the smartest person in the room, speak to the smartest people.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been exciting, and we're documenting all this as it goes. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks, Emma.